Help sick and injured children by donating to my Extra Life campaign. Link in the description and pinned comment. All proceeds go to Children's Wisconsin. If we reach $1,000, I'll make my Discord server public. Warning: the horrifying theme of this video may be inappropriate for young children. And cowards.
Remember, anyone can wear the mask.
Well, it's that time again, the spoopy season. That time of year when kids of all ages go around in costumes in search of treats, and horror flicks become the norm on TV. Now, I for one have never been into horror flicks all that much, but I can see why people would love them so much. The kind of movies that keep people on edge. Monster movies, slasher flicks, psychological terror. The kind of stuff that keeps fans shivering with anticipation. And if worse comes to worse, well, we can always look forward to the Riff Tracks guys making fun of them. As for video games, well, there are plenty of games that pay homage to this kind of stuff. If I recall, my first Halloween special about arcade games covered House of the Dead. But this year, we're going a little further back to take a look at Namco's tribute to the classic horror B-movie, Splatterhouse. A game which paid tribute to the likes of Friday the 13th and Evil Dead 2, Splatterhouse is a very morbid game that isn't for the squeamish, especially for its time. Today for this Halloween special, I'm covering the original as well as its two sequels on Sega Genesis.
Hope you people haven't eaten too much in the past couple hours, because the TurboGrafx 16 version of this game came with an advisory warning.
Okay, so finding development details about the original game was pretty difficult. Not everything makes it to Wikipedia after all. I did, however, find a developer interview from 1988 featuring Kazumi Mizuno, the game's chief planner, Hayapaya, a planner for the game, Katsuro Tajima and Yoshinori Kawamoto, two composers for the game, and Ito-kun, a programmer. According to Mizuno, their goal with Splatterhouse was to create a serious horror game, something that was more or less considered taboo at the time. Yeah, gore and violence in video games were controversial as far back as 1976, when the arcade game Death Race ended up being pulled from arcades due to its depiction of violence. The Namco team actually had to make some changes from their original vision due to pushback from the higher-ups. Case in point, their zombies couldn't bleed red. Yeah, they had to change the blood to green. Not to mention, they had wanted to put a lot more voice samples into the game. Voice samples weren't something that were common at the time, but they added to the effectiveness of the game. The game was developed on the Namco System 1 arcade board and released in Japan in November of 1988, with a worldwide release the following year. The Attract mode gives us the lowdown on the plot, with protagonist Rick Taylor and his girlfriend Jennifer making the terrible mistake of taking shelter from a storm in an abandoned mansion in the woods. That's not good. Well, let's pop a quarter in the slot and start this horror fest up. So we start the game and already we see that Rick is in bad shape and is only alive thanks to this living mask. Gee, I wonder where they got the idea for this one. Anyway, this fearsome faceware is known as the Terror Mask, and it revitalizes Rick and turns him into a superpowered berserker. He awakens in a dungeon full of grotesque freaks and he's raring for a fight. The game is a 2D side-scrolling beat-em-up, and the controls are as basic as it gets. Left, right, jump, and attack. Oh, also, you can pick up items like meat cleavers and 2x4s to smack around all sorts of zombies and other grotesqueries. It's like Jason Voorhees decided to wage war against the Deadites. So the first boss area is basically a room full of these worm monsters, and you can easily smash them all by moving to the far right and spamming punches constantly. Then we move on to stage 2, and the transitions are actually really cool, with the door breaking to reveal the environment ahead. And it looks like another dungeon with a few more obstacles and more items like a wrench. The second phase takes you into a sewer with sludge monsters and spike balls until you reach a ladder to the boss room, and now we're taking some cues from Poltergeist with possessed furniture. Stage 3 actually takes us outside where we find the most classic of anti-zombie paraphernalia, a boomstick! And here we have the game's first instance of branching paths. If you step on a shadow on the bridge, for example, a phantom hand will drag you to the river below. And from this point on, the bosses are more traditional. And more bullshit. Due to your weak aerial mobility, you won't always be able to get out of the way when you attack and end up punished as a result. Like this chainsaw freak. Beat the guy through what seems like sheer luck. Stage 4 continues the grossness with spinning blade traps and a hallway with mirror monsters that have your moveset. Did I mention that this mansion belonged to a parapsychologist who was rumored to have been conducting horrific human experiments in this crazy house? Coincidentally, Rick happens to be a parapsychology major. Well, the boss room in this stage is a chapel, and the boss is an upside-down cross encircled by zombie heads.
Wow, they're hitting all the taboos here, aren't they?
Well, once the cross dies, Rick hears Jennifer's scream of terror and cue stage 5 and oh shit, we gotta hurry! There are several route branches in this level, including clothing rooms, chambers with severed heads, painting ghosts years before Luigi's mansion, and other oddities. But at last we managed to find Jennifer and...
Oh. Fuck.
Of all the things we didn't want to happen, this is probably the worst thing that could have happened. Worst of all, at certain points during this boss fight, between delivering jump kicks and dodging the mutated Jennifer's extending claw, there are moments when she gains her humanity and cries for help, only to transform again. After 3 phases, she regains her humanity for good, only to disintegrate in Rick's arms. Hold it together, Rick. It's time to avenge her. Except that stage 6 is honestly the worst stage in the game. There's only one type of enemy here, but they spawn constantly and everywhere. And the boss fight is full-on Contra, except you just punch the heart to death in a battle of attrition. Oh well, one last stage. As Rick escapes from the burning house, dodging flaming logs and creatures, eventually you reach a gravestone. And of course, the mask is evil as it awakens a monster called Hell Chaos. It swipes at you with its monstrous hands and sends debris at you as it emerges from the ground. But just time your jumps and punch it real hard and the spirit inside explodes into ectoplasm. And so does the mask explode, leaving Rick alone, traumatized and heartbroken, as the only one to walk away alive from the Splatterhouse. And cue credits. After which, the mask inexplicably reforms itself with an appropriately evil laugh. The end. So while the impact of Splatterhouse may have diminished over time, both from a gameplay perspective and in terms of shock value, some things about the game still hold up. For one thing, the music is appropriately creepy. Far from the cartoonish whimsy of games like Pac-Man or the epic feel of games like Tower of Druaga, the tunes of Splatterhouse fit the horror feel very well. As far as the graphics go, it is gruesome given the standards of the time. Seeing monsters and zombies go splat with viscera is a satisfying sight. The controls may be a little awkward and, let's face it, a bit limited, but the gameplay does its job of bringing horror to an arcade setting. And the way the game sent you back to a checkpoint when you died at least did a good job of discouraging credit feeding. Of course, being the gore fest that it was, limited its success because not as many arcades were willing to carry it. Again, violence was seen as a big no-no even then. As such, when it did get ported to home consoles, it had to be censored quite a bit. Weapons were changed, the overall gore factor was reduced, and the American version pretty much removed any religious references whatsoever. Now, apart from the 2 sequels on Genesis, more on those in a bit, there was a spin-off parody slash prequel, slash, called Splatterhouse Wanpuku Graffiti, which was more light-hearted in tone. It was actually made available as part of the Namco Museum archives in case you're so inclined. The original game has gotten a few re-releases, including Namco Museum on Switch. However, the sequel would appear on Genesis a few years later. Splatterhouse 2, released in 1992, would pick up 3 months after Rick escaped from the horrors of the mansion, suffering from massive survivor's guilt, when the revived Terror Mask calls out to him, claiming that Jennifer is still alive and promising to give Rick the power to save her, all in an intro that's way longer than it needs to be, revealing that there's another house. And when I say that Splatterhouse 2 picks up where the original left off, I mean that pretty much literally. The gameplay and controls are pretty much unchanged. In fact, the Japanese version is literally called Splatterhouse Part 2. Of course, this time you don't start in the house itself. The first few stages are spent actually trying to get to the damn place, starting on a nearby path and smashing a hideous flesh monster along the way, taking an elevator to an underground passage where a spectral head awaits, and going upstream across a tainted river to face off with possessed garden tools and hanging midgets. The music is as spooky as before, this time with that signature Genesis twang to it, but the graphics do seem a little more washed out when compared with the original. I mean, yeah, this entire series is dark, but the colors themselves do seem a bit darker than in the original game. Anyways, in Stage 4, we actually make the final approach to the house, with the branching paths returning and a hideous golem barring our entry, which turns into a gross-out spider-like creature. One thing I noticed to this point was that the bosses seemed a bit more pattern-oriented than in the original game. I was able to figure them out eventually for the most part, and there seemed to be decidedly fewer bullshit moments. Granted, it was still difficult, but a bit more manageable. Now in Stage 5, we're inside the house itself, and one lesson we should know by now is don't trust anything in a haunted house. You probably thought that those deer heads were taxidermized by Chuck Testa. Nope, they're not. They're alive and spitting toxic acid. Meanwhile, we go through a library, a lab, a sewer, and deal with a zombie scientist before reaching Stage 6, which is basically an enemy rush as severed heads and other body parts and a head snake try to stop us from chasing after Jennifer, who's been sucked into the void. But, trooper that Rick is, he goes in after her, which is Stage 7. Despite falling into the void, you have full control, not to mention ghostly heads to deal with. Eventually, you find Jennifer imprisoned within a crystal, and you have to break her out, not to mention escape from a very angry spirit to finish the level. And then there's one last stage in which the two of you have to escape. Starting with an elevator where you fend off a couple zombies while dodging debris, fighting off a lake creature with very precise placement, and this freaky amalgamation of flesh which explodes into a necrobat before finally getting away. And even though the new house meets the same fate as the old one, and even though Jennifer is finally safe with our hero, Rick knows he still can't rest easy as long as that mask still remains.
Translation? We're already starting working on the next one, so start saving your 20s right now!
Overall, Splatterhouse 2 is serviceable as a sequel to the original, but not much beyond that. The gameplay remains unchanged, for better or worse, with similar setups at that. There are a few neater visual effects here and there, but really, it's just more of the same. Of course, considering that the original Splatterhouse was a messy good time, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just that we've seen it all before. But we wouldn't see the last of the mask. For just a year later, Splatterhouse 3 would give us one last haunt on the Genesis. And it turns out that even getting married, having a kid, becoming a successful businessman, and buying a mansion of his own wouldn't be enough for Rick to catch a break. Because now evil forces have taken over his new home, and his now wife Jennifer and his son David are in danger. And this one is significantly different. This one plays more like a traditional beat-em-up like Streets of Rage, with some exploration elements involved as well. No more checkpoints for losing a life, and you can even Hulk out by collecting power orbs. You also have a few special moves, but the one you'll be relying on most is the spin kick, with its added damage and invincibility frames. To move on to the next room in each level, you need to clear it out of enemies, after which you can check the map to plot your course. And that's important, because if that timer runs out before you reach the boss, bad stuff happens, illustrated by static cutscenes, which included digitized photos in the original. In Stage 1, for instance, you have to find Jennifer before she gets killed. But even if you do reach the boss in time, she's still not necessarily in the clear. The evil one has placed a boar worm inside of her, and now you have to navigate Stage 2 and defeat the giant boar worm before she's turned into a monster herself. And the process is told in disgusting detail and illustrated in disturbing photos. And if you run out of time...
Yeah, there's a reason that I mark my videos as not for kids.
As it turns out, however, Jennifer was just a distraction. No sooner is the giant boar worm defeated, and regardless of Jennifer's fate, Rick hears his son David's voice and realizes he's in danger. So Rick heads up to the 3rd floor where David is hiding from the monsters, and fights his way through even stronger monsters in order to reach him. Meanwhile, the cutscenes show that the monsters are growing ever closer to David. And try as Rick might, all that's waiting for him is a doppelganger and a monstrous teddy bear. As one does. As the mask points out, it's David who the evil one is really after. The Fiend needs the boy's latent power to unlock the Dark Stone and the black magic that lays dormant within it. Looks like we've got a kid to save, and that means going to the basement. And there's some new monsters to deal with here, including these cloaked bastards that dodge many of your attacks. Meanwhile, the evil one is trying to drain David's power under the lunar eclipse. Uh-oh, we need to hurry or David's done for! Don't let that timer run out! Also, there's a giant egg which hatches into another grotesquerie to deal with, and hopefully in time to save David. Either way, the evil one hasn't given up, because the stone is still in his clutches. At this point, I don't even know if the timer means anything, but the sooner you can get to the boss, the better, because you'll likely be in better shape. As for the evil one himself, well, not only is his design rather generic looking, but I teased him with jump kicks. Well, at least the evil one is finally defeated and Rick can return to his family. Psych! The mask becomes the villain instead. Why is Rick even surprised at this point?
Seriously, that thing is called the Terror Mask. Did you not consider that it would turn on you? Think, Rick, think!
So one final showdown with the mask, which assimilates with the remnants of the evil one, while somehow still on Rick's face. Anyway, this fight is a two-part battle, and while the first phase is relatively easy, the second phase is pretty damn hard. Eventually, the mask is defeated, and you get your ending. If you fail to save either Jennifer or David, the ending is a sorrowful one. But if you save them both, you get the true ending, and yeah, I'd say it's worth it to be free of that abomination for good. And that's Splatterhouse 3, a Genesis classic and the highlight of the trilogy, to be honest. I was never the best at old-school beat-em-ups, but I still really enjoyed them. And Splatterhouse 3 is one of the better ones on Genesis. The graphics are still crisp and creepy, and while the music during gameplay is less creepy than the previous two games, it gives a bit more of an action-oriented vibe, which works well for what we have. The exploration element is interesting and harkens back to games like River City Ransom, but the fact that the time limit determines what happens puts that bit of tension on you as you try to find the best route. Not to mention, goddamn is it hard! Even with save states, it took me quite a while to finish, and the images that accompany cutscenes can be pretty chilling if you take too long. And that brings an end to the Splatterhouse trilogy. It's gory for the era, it's challenging as hell, and it's damn satisfying. But sadly, it's not the most accessible. Splatterhouse 1 is part of Namco Museum on Switch, as I mentioned before, but Splatterhouse 2 was available on Wii Virtual Console, which is no longer for sale, and is only gonna be on the Genesis 2 Mini. As for Splatterhouse 3, it's gotten even fewer re-releases, probably due to the digitized images in the game. In fact, Namco Bandai had to replace the images when the trilogy was included in the 2010 reboot. As for said reboot, well, let's just say your mileage may vary.
And yeah, no matter which one you start out with, it's not a series for the faint of heart. Like I said, the TurboGrafx 16 version says it's not for young children. Or cowards. But if you're a fan of horror movies, this should be right up your undead alley. Just remember, evil never truly dies forever. I'm the Quarter Guy, and until next time, the arcade is closed.
Tell me, why is it that you fight? For love found in a moment? For the warmth of family? For the sake of one's legacy? For your own sense of justice? For the pride of being the strongest? For freedom from those who would oppress? For the sake of honor and duty? Whatever your purpose, find the strength to see it through to its conclusion. Next time, Live Alive Ranked. It's game time! Hey everyone, QG here. If you enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe, leave a comment, and share the video around. Feel free to check out my Twitter and my Twitch streams, and consider supporting me through Patreon and donating to my Extra Life campaign to support Children's Wisconsin. Thanks for watching.